Tantor Audio presents Alector's Choice by L.E. Modesitt, Jr. Narrated by McCarley. Proud towers rise to challenge sea and sky, green needles that capture the dullest eye, and palaces and halls with columns strong and true, with glory, song, and pleasures for the few. So seemly are those soaring spires, that few remember the fierce desires, and fewer still the price Corus pays for each Alector's unending days. Yet towers unseen in the higher chill hold ancients with a different will, who also ask a price, more long delayed, but still upon your living spirits laid. Landers, which fate and bargain will you take? Which deadly compromise is left to make? 1. Colonel Dainyl looked down at the stack of reports on his desk. He was almost afraid to take his eyes off them. The moment he looked away, more reports appeared. He knew that wasn't so, but it was the way things felt. Although he was the number 4 Myrmidon officer on Corus, when he studied all the reports, he felt more like a glorified lander clerk. He pushed the resentment aside. He'd had his years as a flying officer, more than most Myrmidons, and he'd been rewarded for long and faithful service. He could have easily been one of the rankers who spent decades or longer in service, yet who never became more than a squad leader or an undercaptain, if that. He brushed back a lock of shimmering black hair that needed to be trimmed, he reminded himself, and glanced toward the window that looked out on the headquarters courtyard. There, on the raised stage, a pterodon had just landed, folding back its long blue leathery wings. The Myrmidon rider vaulted from the saddle and handed the dispatch case to the headquarters duty squad leader. So early in the morning, it had to be the incoming daily message run from Ludar. For a moment, Dainyl just watched the ranker and pterodon. Then he looked down at the report he had been reading, the Quintal Operations Report from the 7th Myrmidon Company at Duarchy. At the sound of boots on marble, he looked up once more, this time toward the open study door that allowed him a view, such as it was, of the main corridor of Myrmidon headquarters. Submarshal Dainyl walked quickly past Dainyl's open door toward the one remaining study on the corridor, that of Marshal Shastilt. Dainyl could sense something, and Dainyl looked determined, or worried. That was unusual for any Alector, and especially for Dainyl, who never showed emotion other than a calm pleasantness, even when Dainyl used talent senses, although Dainyl had always been careful only to use those senses to receive. Not that there was anything that Dainyl could have done to alleviate Dainyl's worries. The submarshal was his direct superior, and had always maintained a certain reserve, more so than the usual for an Alector. Dainyl was well respected, and well connected to both the Duarchy of Elsene and the Duarchy of Ludar, and to the high Alectors who surrounded both Duarches. The colonel forced his attention back to the report, noting that Major Ferralt had cited the loss of a skylance, and the receipt of a replacement from Litterna. Dainyl paused, then reread the section. How could a Myrmidon have lost a skylance without losing both rider and pterodon? That had not happened in centuries. He jotted down a note to ask for a fuller explanation. As he turned to the section summarizing 7th Company's flights for the last 2-month quint, the slightest flash of purpleness, something sensed by his talent, not seen by his eyes, flared before Dainyl. Almost without thought, he was on his feet and out of his study, nearly running toward the marshal's closed doorway. He came to a halt outside the door, but he could sense nothing through the heavy wood. Usually he could sense something. "Sir?" he called. "Are you all right?" There was no answer. "Sir?" With still no answer, Dainyl opened the study door, his hand ready to grab his holstered sidearm as he stepped into the chamber, closing the door behind him. Marshal Shastilt lay half-sprawled on the floor beside his wide desk. Several papers lay strewn on the green marble floor, as if the marshal's hand had knocked them from the desk as he had fallen. Once inside the study, Dainyl could sense the marshal's life force, weak but steady, and that he was breathing. Sub-Marshal Dainyl was not breathing. As Dainyl watched, his life force and aura finished fading, then vanished. Within moments, all that remained on the smooth green marble floor of the study were Dainyl's uniform, sidearm, and boots. Dainyl swallowed. While he'd seen more than a few Cadmians and other landers and indigens die over the years, he had only seen a handful of Myrmidons die, their bodies vanishing into dust nearly instantly, in accidents, and once after a death sentence for gross negligence. But he'd never seen a high-ranking Myrmidon or Alector die. That just didn't happen, and certainly not in the Myrmidon Marshal's study. The Marshal groaned faintly, and Dainyl immediately knelt. He could sense no broken bones or severe internal injuries, so he gently turned the Marshal onto his back and waited. Within several moments, the Marshal's life force had purpled into greater strength, and his breathing was steadier. Shortly, his eyes opened. Dainyl helped him to his feet. With his shimmering black hair, unaging alabaster face, and violet eyes, the Marshal looked no different from any of the other most senior Alectors, save that he was a span or so taller than Dainyl's 2.5 yards. Shastilt's eyes flickered to the clothing and boots on the floor. His lips tightened slightly, but he said nothing as Dainyl helped him into the chair. Dainyl waited while the Marshal caught his breath. "Has anyone else been in here?" Shastilt finally asked. "No, sir. I sensed something, and when no one answered, I came in and closed the door behind me." The Marshal nodded slowly, his deep violet eyes fixing on Dainyl. Neither Alector spoke. Dainyl waited, holding his talent shields, not certain how the Marshal might react. "You do understand, Dainyl?" "Yes, sir." Dainyl understood all too well. In whatever had transpired before he entered, Dainyl had crossed the Marshal, and paid the price. "You have always been cautiously decisive. That is a good characteristic." He swallowed, then coughed, straightening in the chair. "You may not know this, but the Sub-Marshal was several decades older than I." There was no reason Dainyl would have known. Alectors never showed their age, holding the same appearance from early adulthood until death, until that time when they could no longer hold their life force. "He was deeply concerned about some trends he was seeing all across Corus, and he could see that his life force was failing." Dainyl knew that the Marshal was lying, and that Shastilt knew that Dainyl recognized that. The Colonel nodded. "I just felt something and knew something had happened." Shastilt cleared his throat. "Dainyl and I have both known that Corus faces a transition in the next few years, one that will change everything." Every Alector knew that. Ifrin was failing, as its life force was drained away, and in the next decade the Archon of Ifrin, based on the recommendation of the highest field master, would have to choose where to transfer the master scepter, either to Corus or Ephra. That choice would decide the fate of two worlds.
That choice does not have to be made that soon, does it, sir? Preparations must be made one way or another, and how those preparations are handled may also affect the choice.
Shastilt reached out and lifted the goblet of water on the corner of the desk, taking a small swallow.
Submarshal Dainyl felt most strongly about the decisions made by our High Alector of Justice. Dainyl reported his concerns to the highest, and was told that, while he had identified some valid problems, plans would have to go forth as outlined, especially since Submarshal Alciner in Alastra had no such concerns. Not many are allowed to question the highest. None are allowed to refuse the highest.
Since the Myrmidons' prime function was to ensure and enforce justice, the High Alector of Justice on Corus was effectively the director of all Myrmidon activities. For a submarshal to refuse his duties... Dainyl shook his head. He could understand a submarshal's resigning. It had not happened often, but there were precedents. But to refuse without resigning?
I see you understand.
Enough, sir. It was all too clear that, in the contest of wills and life force between the marshal and the submarshal, the marshal had prevailed. Dainyl also understood that it would be foolhardy to oppose both the highest and the marshal.
A most cautious response. That is fitting for these times.
Shastilt glanced to the uniform on the floor.
There will be a week of mourning for the death of the submarshal. He served Ifrin, the Archon, and the Duarchys long and well, but life force failed even the most powerful in time. I will have to meet with the highest to determine how he wishes to proceed.
Yes, sir.
For the moment, you will remain as Director of Operations and Maintenance as before.
Shastilt smiled, an expression not so much of triumph as one that showed the relief of someone who had successfully passed a great trial.
That will be all, Colonel.
Dainyl nodded respectfully.
If you would summon the duty officer on your way out.
Yes, sir. Dainyl half-bowed once more, then turned and departed, closing the door most carefully behind him as he headed back down the corridor to the desk of the day's duty officer, Under Captain Gonner. His steps were firm on the green marble floor. 2. Mykel ambled over to the edge of the grape arbor that he could just touch without stepping out from under the roof of the warm-weather dining porch. The golden-red grapes were perfect, ripe but still firm, glowing in the orange-tinged light before sunset. He eased one from the rear of a bunch, shaded enough so that it was cooler, and taken from where its absence wouldn't be noticed until his parents harvested that section of the vine.
I saw that.
His father laughed, stepping through the rear archway with a bronze tray holding 6 heavy goblets.
A captain in the Mounted Rifles, nearly 26 years old, and you're still snitching grapes.
Mykel turned and grinned. Just one. They're best right off the vine. He popped the grape in his mouth, slightly tart, but still sweet and cool. He was careful not to let any of the juice escape. The pale blue dress tunic was one of the few he had that wasn't a uniform, and he'd inherited it from his grandfather 2 years earlier.
Don't let your mother catch you. She wants those as ripe as possible for the holiday wine.
Oland set the tray down in the center of the long table, then straightened.
Has he been pulling grapes off the vine again?
Asked Viancet, following his father through the archway, carrying a large pitcher of wine drawn from the cask in the cellar.
"Some things don't change,"
replied Olent. Vianset, who was barely 17, shook his head. His flowing blonde hair, darker than Mykel's, momentarily flipped away from his head. Mykel didn't much care for his youngest brother's hairstyle, but had never said anything. Once Vianset joined a guild, or became a Cadmean, the long locks would go. In Fatel, only day laborers, small farmholders, peasants, all usually indigents or students, generally landers from the skilled crafting or larger landholding families, had long hair.
"The fowl will be ready in just a bit,"
Ialia announced from the archway, smiling at her husband and their sons.
"Try to leave the grapes alone, Mykel."
"I'm trying."
"You always were."
His mother smiled broadly before disappearing into the house. Mykel blotted his forehead with the back of his hand. Early harvest was hot in Fatel, and even warmer in Elsene, unless the westerlies blew hard off the ocean for several days straight.
"You have to go back on Londi, don't you?"
asked Olent.
"I have to be back before midnight on Dekti. I'll leave on the early coach."
That wasn't quite true, because Mykel really had until muster on Londi morning, but he wasn't about to wait until the very last moment. All the same, Mykel found it hard to believe that 16 days of his 2-week leave were already over, and that he just had 3 more nights, and 2 full days, before he had to head back on his return to duty. He was fortunate that he was stationed outside Elsene, just 70 vaunts from home.
"Will you get more leave when you become an overcaptain?"
asked Vianset.
"If I ever make overcaptain. No.
All officers get 4 weeks' leave in a year, and that's only when we're in quarters. There's no leave when we're deployed."
"I can't see being a Cadmean, or even a city patroller,"
offered Vianset.
"I wasn't very good in the basic physical training. Not like you."
"It's not just physical," Mykel replied, trying to keep his voice even. Why did so many people, even his brother, think that Cadmeans were all muscle?
"No, you also have to believe in things, like why you can't cut too many trees, or plant too many of the same crops, or use wood when stone or steel will do."
"Vianset."
Olent drew out his younger son's name.
"There are good reasons for those."
"Oh yes, I'm sure."
"Vianset,"
barked Olent, turning his broad and muscular frame. Vianset lowered his eyes.
"I'm sorry, father."
His voice wasn't that sorry, Mykel reflected, but, as the old saying went, Vianset listened to the wind songs of the ancients. Not that anyone even knew if the ancients had even sung. After an awkward silence, he asked, "What are you thinking of doing when you finish your studies next quintum?"
"I don't know. I don't want to work for any of the artisans or engineers guilds. If you're a lander, you do the hard work that takes brains. And if you're indigent, or if the Alectors think you're stupid, you end up in the coal mines or as a labourer and die young."
"You're anything but stupid." Vianset was bright, but lazy and stubborn. Not that Mykel was about to say that, although his grandfather had, often and loudly, before his sudden death.
"Besides, in most of the respected guilds, you can't ever say a word about what you do."
Mykel understood that. He'd never liked the guild's silence rules either. There are still the building crafts and trade, even factoring. Vianset shrugged.
"I'll never be a master tiler like grandfather or father. When I see the mosaics father does, the head of the structural engineers had his last one turned into Eternistone."
Mykel pursed his lips. His father had never mentioned that. Supposedly, the transformation process, kept to the recorders of deeds and the highest of electors, cost hundreds of golds and was used for great works of art, or for the most important buildings, and, of course, the high roads of the Duarchy. He turned to his father. "You never told me that."
"It was good. It wasn't that good,"
replied Olent.
"They wanted it eternal because it's in the receiving hall of the artisans and displays their seal."
"Does that make it eternal?"
asked Cecilia, Mykel's older sister, who had stepped through the archway carrying a large covered casserole on an enameled bronze tray.
"The Hall of Justice in Elsene has been standing for more than 3 centuries, and it looks like it was finished yesterday. I won't be sticking around long enough to find out if my poor mosaic will last that long."
Olent laughed.
"Like my own Da said, you have to take pleasure in what you do, not in what people might think about it years from now."
Cecilia set the casserole in the middle of the table.
"Everyone should sit down. Mother and Bortal are bringing the fowl and the bread."
Olent took the chair at the head of the table. Mykel slipped onto the chair to his father's right, across from Cecilia. Aelia appeared and set the serving platter in front of her husband before taking her seat at the other end of the table. The squarish Bortal hurried after her, setting a basket of bread on each end of the table, then settling between his wife and Aelia. The last one to the table was Vianset, who seated himself to Mykel's right. Olent looked at Aelia, then cleared his throat.
"In the name of the one who was, is, and will be, may our food be blessed and our lives as well, in the times of prosperity and peace, and those which are neither. Blessed be the lives of both the deserving and the undeserving, that both may strive to do good in the world and beyond. And may we always recall that we do not judge our worthiness, but leave that judgment to the one who is."
After a moment of silence, he lifted his head and looked to Aelia.
"You prepared it, dear."
"Thank you, but it's in front of you."
Mykel's father took 3 slices of the fowl, then nodded to Mykel. Mykel took 2 before lifting the platter and handing it to Vianset, who, in turn, held it while Aelia served herself. Next came the lace potatoes, the steamed sprouts, and the bread. Aelia had cooked and served the fowl the way Mykel liked it best, roasted and basted with sesame oil, then served with a sauce of powdered ground nuts and mint. The lace potatoes were crisp on the outside, but hot and moist inside. "Excellent," he said, looking to his mother.
"Thank you."
"You're welcome, dear."
Aelia glanced at Cecilia.
"I miss the children."
"We don't,"
replied Bortal, glancing sideways at his wife.
"I might get to eat my entire supper."
"Oh, they're always sweet,"
replied Aelia.
"They are indeed,"
suggested Olent.
"But with 4 of them, I can see how Cecilia and Bortal might enjoy a meal or 2 without them."
Aelia sniffed.
"I'll bring them by tomorrow,"
Cecilia promised.
"You can feed them midday dinner and see how sweet they are then."
Mykel grinned. He'd helped Cecilia the day before.
How are things going with you?"
asked Bortal quickly, looking at Mykel.
"You won't have to go off and fight any time soon, will you, like with those raiders in the north?"
"The Rayleighs?" Mykel shook his head. "Not for a while. They've been pushed back practically to Blacksteer. The land's not bad there. It's the northern part of the Vales of Prosperity, and the Duarches have granted them the rights to use it, except for timbering. If they raid anyone, they lose that right."
"Raiding, that's in the blood,"
suggested Olent. "That's why I said it would be a while," replied Mykel. "They'll try to settle down. Can't do that much anyway now. We killed half the men who could carry weapons."
"I'd always thought you'd become an engineer,"
interjected Cecilia.
"Landers can only be apprentice engineers. The real engineers are Alectors,"
volunteered Vianset.
Even the head mining engineers are Alectors. The ones at the mines just do whatever the Alectors in Ludar say.
Farlak is a real engineer, suggested Aelia.
He's father's age,
countered Vianset.
He does twice the work of all the Alectors, and has for years. They made him an assistant engineer last year. That's where they start the most junior Alectors.
It's always been that way, Mykel pointed out. Olent cleared his throat, loudly.
You think that Mykel should be a colonel?
Aelia arched her eyebrows at Vianset.
Or a Myrmidon captain commanding pterodons? Or that you should start as a master tailor?
Vianset winced. Mykel offered an easy smile. I'm just a Cadmean captain of mounted rifles. That's good enough for now.
Not that many become officers,
Cecilia said.
All my brothers tried,
added Bortal.
Corilt was the only one they took. He's only a squad leader, and he's 2 years older than Mykel.
The blocky tile-setter frowned.
He's in Zolt. That's where they've just finished the high road between Tempra and Southgate. His last letter said that they might see some action, but he couldn't say where. You heard anything?
Someone's always unhappy somewhere, Mykel said. Could be the Rayleys in the Northwester Hills, or the Nomads in the hills east of the Dry Coast.
What about the ancient ones?
Asked Vianset. There aren't any left. Just a few ruins here and there.
How do they know? The ancient ears say they're biding their time.
Mykel laughed dryly. If the Myrmidons on their pterodons and the recorders of deeds with their tables can't find any trace of them, there aren't any.
Do the tables really exist?
Asked Cecilia.
Have you seen one?
No, Mykel admitted, but I've been ordered places where we've found exactly what the recorders said we'd find, and there hadn't been any Alectors or pterodons anywhere near.
Maybe the tables don't really exist,
suggested Cecilia.
Maybe the Alectors just claim that they do, so that they don't have to explain how they know things.
Mykel shrugged. That could be. But however they know, they do know. I wouldn't want to try to keep anything hidden from them.
Who are the Alectors?
Asked Vianset.
I mean, where did they come from?
Where did we come from? Asked Olent.
We both came from the great beyond in the time before time, and the Alectors have been our guides and mentors. You really believe that?
Vianset gave a laugh that was almost a snort. Olent gave an embarrassed smile.
That's what we're taught, and I don't have a better answer. Do you?
They're not that much smarter.
Even a little brains means a lot, Vianset, countered Olent. They're also much, much stronger, and I've heard that arrows bounce off them. If you have a better idea, what is it?
I don't know. I just don't think all that's true.
Then where did we all come from? Asked Olent. We've never found any ruins used by people or Alectors, and only a few things that were used by the ancients.
Mykel tended to believe Vianset was right, but he'd already seen enough of Corus to know that what his father had just said was also correct. But unless, or until, he learned more, he wasn't about to step into the argument. Besides, what good would it do? Vianset would just argue more, and his father would get his back up. From what Mykel had seen, the Duarches ruled Corus, and they didn't do it that badly. In dealing with the Rayleys, Mykel had seen what a mess both indigents and landers made of things. After a moment of silence, Cecilia spoke.
Bortal laid the foundations for another bedroom.
Another bedroom? Mykel blurted.
Congratulations!
Olent beamed.
5 mouths.
Mykel bit off the words and forced a smile. His older sister turned.
With the Duarch's stipend for a 5th child, we can build the new room and still have silvers left over.
She smiled.
I'm glad it will work out.
Mykel offered, as gracefully as he could. 5 children? Even 5 well-behaved children? He reached for the fowl platter and took another.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?